Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Axel from Get Speaking English. Welcome to my first live stream. This is still a little bit weird for me. Um, Still trying to figure out how this all works, but welcome. Today we're going to be talking about nature a bit. So just feel free to maybe say hi in the chat if you're out there and let me know who you are. Hey, Alina. It's good to see you. We'll give like a minute or two for people to come on in. Um, and then I've prepared a variety of material for us all to check out. I hope you guys are doing well. Yeah, so just a bit of heads up, I guess, about who I am. Obviously, I'm Axel from Get Speaking English. Yeah, and like I said, I'm very excited. I'm a little bit nervous about our first live stream. I don't use Facebook a lot, but teaching online is really fantastic. So I hope I can do this again. Um, okay. We have someone for Ukraine. Fantastic. And I don't know how to say your name. I'm really sorry. But thank you so much for coming. Yeah, just a bit of an overview. This lesson will be sort of aimed at preparing students for the B2 first, the C1 advanced exam. Okay, great. We have George as well. Amazing. Fantastic. Um, yeah, but the sort of the phrases, the vocabulary, everything that we're going to learn today is also going to be super useful um, for an IELTS exam, for example, or a general English exam. Also, just in general, if you're looking to reach an upper intermediate to an advanced level. All right, and Iona. Okay, Ilona. Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, so we're just going to sort of look together. We're going to brainstorm some useful vocabulary for talking about this topic. So, for talking about nature, some collocations, maybe some key verbs and expressions we could use, idiomatic expressions as well, if we have some time. Then we're going to look at different parts of the exam together. Um, Brainstorm some ideas for how to address the questions, and then after, as usual, I'll share the notes on Discord, and if this video is okay, I'll put it on YouTube as well. That's also my goal as well. Alrighty. So let's brainstorm for a minute what we're gonna do. So what kind of subtopics do you think might come up with this topic? So, for example, maybe if I could think of one, maybe like the weather might be a common one to come up. So, feel free to put your sort of ideas in the chat and I'll add them to the list and we'll put them all together in our notes after as well. All right, perfect. Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad you like this format. Yeah, I think this will be great. Maybe, well, obviously the environment comes up as well. Um, Feel free to put some ideas if you'd like. I feel like climate change, that's a really obvious one that comes up a lot when we're talking about nature, animals as well, like animals, um, maybe endangered species, right? Those sort of things might come up. Possibly also activities of things to do in nature, right? So often on an exam, they might ask you, how do you like to spend time in nature? Or um, what do you do to, get outside and enjoy nature? So those sort of things might come up as well. Yeah. So some good ideas. And feel free to add a few more too if you have in the chat. Um, and I want to think of some collocations as well. So, um, if you don't know, a collocation, they're basically two words or sort of like a few keywords that are always used together. So two or more words that are always used together. So for example, if we could think of some collocations that use, natural, there are always some phrases that we might say that would naturally go with the word natural. So for example, natural, we could say maybe natural selection. So for example, so that has to do with evolution and how sort of animals sort of change, species change over time as they die off and certain other traits become more common and popular. Maybe also natural disasters as well. So for example, I know we had like there were terrible earthquakes in Turkey really recently. So that would definitely count as a natural disaster. Hurricanes. Um, and feel free too to, throw out your ideas, right? So earthquakes, hurricanes, um, droughts. Those are also, uh, yeah, natural disasters that are quite significant. Or maybe the topic of natural resources might come up as well, too. So we're always talking about the resources in the earth, for example. Or natural history as well, too. Which has to do with sort of the history of the earth and sort of going back to prehistoric periods and things as well. If you want to talk about, dinosaurs and the Cambrian period, also the Ice Age, so just the history of the Earth. Hey, Yusef, welcome. It's great to see you today. Yeah, feel free to add any ideas to the chat. Don't be shy. Um, so it would be great if we could brainstorm some language together. And maybe also like natural food or natural products or clothing, right? So things that are made out of maybe eco-friendly material or material that's really, nice and not harmful to the environment, right? All right. So there's some good collocations for that one. So if you guys don't have any other ideas, um, let's talk about weather really quickly too, because I know that there's lots of sort of weather is also a topic that comes up a lot when we talk about nature, right? Especially nowadays with climate change and everything on our minds, right? So let's think of some collocations too for weather. Um, so maybe the first thing that comes to my mind actually, so speaking of climate change, is extreme weather, right? So extreme weather. So we might say something about that, like for example, we're experiencing a lot of extreme weather lately due to climate change, right? So that means that it's very intense, it's very, or maybe very different. Along that lines too, maybe freak weather. So freak weather, freak weather. And that would happen, like, for example, we would call something that's freak weather might be something really abnormal. So, abnormal weather that like rarely happens. Although obviously a lot of freak weather is kind of becoming more and more normal with climate change, unfortunately. But for example, there has been some, freak weather in Texas. I can think, for example, um, with all the recent, snowstorms over the past few years. Yeah, so Texas, if you're not aware, is it's sort of this it's very south in the United States. It's a very hot place, and lately they've been having a lot of like ice storms and snowstorms there. So that is definitely freak weather, so it's not normal at all. So maybe something like that. Yeah, so extreme weather, some climate or extreme weather, freak weather, maybe also how to describe the weather. So, for example, if the weather is good, what sort of adjectives could we maybe think about that? Like, for example, obviously, is a very good weather is a very, very common one, very obvious one, I feel. But there's a couple other ones we could use, maybe like if it's fine, so fine weather. So maybe if it's a sunny day, not too hot, not too cold, we might call it a fine day, or even fair weather as well. A great way to describe very mild weather. Ah, there's another one. Mild weather. Oops, mild. So I think mild is not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just comfortable. No wind or anything like that. Um, if it's really good, I mean, we could maybe describe it as like, maybe beautiful weather, for example, beautiful weather, or fantastic weather, Mm-mm-mm. Or even great. And some great, maybe adjectives for describing really bad weather. So really bad weather. So for example, atrocious weather. So atrocious is quite a fancy word. But it's just a great adjective, a great alternative to saying that something is absolutely terrible. So really terrible, really atrocious. That's a really good one. So terrible, atrocious, terrible. Awful as well. Yeah, so, oops. Yeah, so, we've been having a lot of atrocious weather lately. Maybe we could say something like that. Exactly, terrible weather. Yeah, exactly. It's terrible, awful. Exactly. Um, and then maybe also just a few others that come to mind with weather. So maybe like weather, patterns. So if we want to talk about sort of the reoccurring things that happen often with the weather, we might talk about weather patterns. And we might talk about how weather patterns are changing, with climate change, or with climate change. Yeah. So maybe something like that. Or or also even the weather forecast. So the weather forecast is when we try to predict the weather. A forecast is a prediction, basically. Yeah. So lots of great weather related words. Yeah, so I watched the weather forecast last night and they said it should be fine tomorrow for our beach day. Yes, relaxing weather. Yeah, we can definitely say that as well. Relaxing weather. Right. So I'm going to put that under the good weather category. Relaxing weather. Yeah, so good weather to spend maybe a beach day in or something. Or calm weather as well. It's calm. Yeah, so lots of great ideas. All right. So a really, really quick note, though, just about Weather. Um, so when we talk about weather, we typically mean short-term changes. So what do I mean by that? I mean like how one day it might be sunny, how the next day it might rain, or how one day it might be sunny. Yeah, balmy weather is also a really good one. So that's a good one. Yeah, so how, the weather will change from day to day. So that is weather, short-term changes. But climate, going to be that's always about longer term changes and overall trends. So we'll talk about, climate change, so how the weather patterns and everything are um, changing over time. So we could kind of think of it as weather will tell you the kind of clothes to wear from day to day. So for example, if it's raining, you'll want the umbrella, you'll want your rain boots, but climate will tell you what kind of clothes you should probably have in your wardrobe. So here in Canada, obviously we have harsh winters, so it's really normal for people to have, really warm coats, really warm boots, that sort of thing. And we have that because the climate here is really cold. However, somebody in a warm climate wouldn't need that kind of clothing. Yeah, so you can kind of think about it that way if you ever had trouble remembering. Um, and let's talk about environmental too. So, because there's some great collocations about environmental. So, collocations with environmental. Um, so, for example, maybe environmental. Oh, this is a good word. Degradation, which basically means the destruction of the environment. And I can't spell degradation. There we go. Or environmental pollution. So that's definitely linked to degradation. So the ruining of the environment. So environmental pollution, environmental degradation. Um, Maybe an environmental hazard as well. Um, you'll hear like environmental impact. So environmental changes, exactly. Environmental changes, exactly. So, so we need to plan for the environmental changes we've been seeing lately, or we have to consider the environmental impact of our actions, maybe. Um, mm, mm, mm. Also, maybe um, environmental issues or factors. So things we might think about: environmental issues, factors, considerations. So lots of great ones. Also, you might hear about environmental campaigns, maybe. So these are basically campaigns to save the environment, right? Yeah, so lots of great words. And feel free to, if you can think of any, to throw a few out there. But I want a quick note though. When we say, when we talk about the environment, we always say it with the article. So we always say the. We always say the environment. And that refers, to the land, the sea, the oceans, the air, everything that people and animals live in or live on. We rarely use the article with nature. So nature is a lot. It's a more broader of a concept. It also includes the environment, but also maybe the forces, processes like migration, um, animal reproduction, climate, weather, plant growth, plant processes like photosynthesis. So all of that is nature. We rarely say it with an article. So for example, We could say it's important that we take actions to protect that environment because it's very specific, but she has a strong love of nature. So we would say it without the article, or I really love spending time in nature. The only time that we would ever use nature with an article would be if we're talking about the specific nature of a place, maybe. So I could say, maybe, I love some of the parks near my city. The nature there is truly, I don't know, stunning. Something like that. Truly stunning. Yeah, so there, that's very, very specific. And environmental protection. Yeah, that's a really good one. Exactly. So environmental protection. Yeah, so exactly. Or also environmental protections as well too. So all the policies and everything like that. Exactly. Yeah. So great words. Exactly. All right. So now that we have some sort of base vocabulary to work with, um, maybe let's brainstorm sort of some part one questions. So on the exam, on the B2 first, on the C1 advance, the first part, you never have to interact with your partner or anything like that. The examiner will ask you a question, some questions, they'll ask your partner questions, and you just respond for yourself. And you should respond for around like 10, 20 seconds or so. So you don't want to say too much. But you also want to give a little bit, right? And these questions are always generally about you, your experiences, your opinions. Um, they're always going to be about you, and they're designed sort of to let you warm up as well, so don't worry too much. But maybe let's brainstorm some simple questions. So simple questions about nature and you and your experiences. Um, so one that came to my mind was like, what do you do when you spend time in nature? Um, or are there any, nature reserves or natural parks near your home? So can you think of other questions? So feel free to put in the chat if you can think of a couple other good questions that we can add to our list. Also, maybe, does your country do a good job preserving nature? Or if not, what could it do better? Or maybe, do you enjoy spending time in nature? Why or why not? And you notice that we always say, like, in nature. That's really common to say in nature, or to have a love of nature. Maybe, maybe how important is it to protect the environment? So that would just be like an opinion question. Again, the environment. Also too, maybe about the scenery, like, what's around you, right? Like, so for example, what type of scenery do you find the most beautiful? I'm just brainstorming some ideas. So do you get used to the climate? Yeah, so maybe, so if you've moved or something, or potentially, or maybe if we're talking about the climate change, you would get used to. So maybe we could say something like, um, so the question is, do you get used to the climate? Or so maybe we could say like, Do you get used to the climate? Maybe like what when you go someplace new, what do you do to get to get used to the climate? Maybe. Yeah. And this is a nice one too. Yeah. So what can you do to protect endangered, yeah, animal species? Yeah, exactly. Um, exactly. Or maybe, are there any places near your town or near your city that protect endangered species? Yeah, something like that. So, like rehabilitation centers, maybe, or zoos, for example. Um, yeah, exactly. So lots of great ideas. So obviously, if we're asking, if we're answering one of these questions, it's got to be pretty short. But we should at least, answer. So when answering, we always want to at least like answer the question directly, give a reason, or so expand, usually by giving a reason, give a reason. And then as well, if you want to expand even more, you may not have time quite for part one question, but you could always end by giving a relevant and specific reason. So, or give an example. An example. So, for example, let's maybe brainstorm. Let's brainstorm this one, maybe. What do you do? What do you do to spend time in nature? Let's brainstorm a couple maybe ways to answer this question. So, do you enjoy spending time in nature? Why or why not? So, if we answer the question directly, it would be something, for example, like, yes, I love spending time outside and in nature. Um, second. Okay, there we go. So, yes, I love spending time outside in nature. Um, in particular, I really love biking, and spending time at the park. So that could be an example. But yeah, I love spending time outside in nature. I really like how the fresh air makes me feel there. That could be our way to expand. And in particular, I really love biking and spending time at the park. So that could be sort of a nice short answer as something we could say. Does anyone else maybe have an idea for how we can respond? Yeah, so Alina says, I really enjoy spending time in nature. Um, and then you should follow up by giving a why. So, yeah, so I really enjoy spending time in nature. Um, why you feel that way. Maybe it's good for the body. Maybe it's really good for me mentally. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we could change this one a little bit. So, who do you see as in do you who do you see yourself as in environmental protection? Maybe like what do you do to mm-mm-mm, protect the environment? So usually if we use environmental protection or environmental protections, that's often they are talking about laws and things and policies for protecting the environment. Um, but yeah, it might be common to be asked a question about, what do you do to help protect the environment? So that would be a pretty easy, quick question. All right. So let's maybe move on then. So in part two, they always have an image comparison, a bit of an image comparison task. So depending on the exam, so the B2, first you get uh, two images, and in C1 Advanced you would get three images. And you must compare and contrast the two photos and then answer the question or questions. So on B2 first, it's only one question. On the C1 Advanced, it's two questions. And so you have to talk about these images and answer the question or questions in 1 minute. Um, and then your partner will have to answer a question about your photos, and then the same thing would happen with your partner. But let's look at these questions, or these photos rather. So let's go here. Yeah. So the photos are always they're very similar in nature. They always have a common theme. And the questions are always designed to make you speculate sort of about other people and other people's experiences. So, for example, there's a lot of children in these photos. So it could be like, what might children learn in situations like these? Or how might the people feel in these places? Or um, why did these people decide to do these activities? So something like that, that you kind of have to speculate uh, or hypothesize or guess really why they did what they did, or why might people choose to spend time in nature doing these activities. So let's brainstorm though really quickly. So maybe key vocabulary for describing these pictures, and I haven't. So this will be picture one, this will be picture two, this will be picture three. All right. So let's maybe just focus on brainstorming some vocabulary for describing the photos. So let's just try that. Let's try photo one for starter. Photo one. What might we say to describe this photo? I mean, I guess some like obvious things. It's like to garden. They're gardening, right? Or to do gardening. We might say that. Or to grow plants as well. Also, it's really hard to sort of figure out what they are looking at, and that's really common. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what's going on in the photo, but we could say, fruits or vegetables. Oops. Or even just vegetation. Vegetation. So, like for example, it looks like they are harvesting some kind of fruit or vegetable. Yeah. Or maybe it seems like they are spending some time together gardening. Um, yeah, we always spend time doing something, so the ing form there. Um, Maybe they're teaching. He's teaching. So for example, we could say to teach, children. Teach children, how to grow food, maybe, or to teach, children about food. You could teach about something, or to teach how to do something, or even just to teach someone to do something. So, yeah, maybe it looks like maybe he's a father, like there's a father. Yeah, maybe there looks like there's a father showing his daughter how to grow some plants. Yeah, so we could say that maybe, exactly. So, yeah. So, exactly. To show how to grow. Yeah, exactly. Plants. Um, Maybe also they're doing it just to spend time together. I mean, I know a lot of people do gardening as a hobby, right? So maybe just to spend time together outdoors to get some fresh air, right? You say to get some fresh air, to get fresh air. Yeah, so maybe something like that. For the second photo, so up here, obviously they are not inside, but they're outside. Um, so for example, it looks like they are in some sort of like a natural history museum there, coming back to that collocation. So it looks like a natural history museum. So natural history museum. And we would say to go to a museum, so to go to a museum or to spend time at a museum or the museum. Yeah, so maybe something like that. Um, Also, those displays are called exhibits. So those displays. Um, yeah, so it looks like there's some sort of exhibits. There's like a science exhibit of animals. Maybe they're learning about different habitats, since it looks like there's some sort of safari or savanna, um, like African savanna. They have like the big fields, the big plains, with the animals. Um, Maybe they're also learning about species or endangered species or protected species, since we can see, there's some rhinoceroses there, it looks like. Some rhinoceros. And some giraffes, exactly. So yeah, so maybe they're learning all about this. And then finally the last one, it looks like maybe they are so photo three, what could we say about photo three? I mean, some words that so it looks like they are camping, so we could say to camp, but it's common to say if I should find a headline for these pictures, it would be, yeah, maybe spending time with your children. Yeah, it looks like they are definitely, It's like why, yeah, maybe a good question for these would be like, why did these people choose to spend time with their children doing these activities? Maybe something like that. So why did these people choose to spend their time with their children doing these activities? Yeah, exactly. They all have to do with like people with children, if families together in um being connected with nature, right? Yeah. So exactly. So the third one, so we would call this, it's like a camp. So a camp. And we could use camp as a verb as well, but we often say to go camping. Um yeah, or they're, at a campsite. We might call that a campsite. Campsite. Yeah, campsite. That pit might be a campfire. We could see some tents. The tents look like this is maybe part of a tent, and this is part of a tent. Uh, a tent, campfire. It looks like maybe they're even learning how to cook, to learn how to cook. Or actually, you know what these things remind me of maybe? They're like, I don't think it's obvious, but you know how you put the little, we call them marshmallows? That's not a very good description, but you would roast them over a fire. So maybe they are roasting marshmallows. That's a very to roast marshmallows. Yeah, that's a very very common thing that you might do around a campfire. Um, we also might say to sleep under the stars. So that means that you're outside and you're exposed. Yeah, so this isn't quite a barbecue, but this we would call this because a barbecue is more like it's a bit different as a contraption. I'm gonna show you a barbecue if I can. Second here. So you can see this here. The sort of the grill is a bit bigger. Yeah, maybe they're making sausages or hot dogs. Exactly. Yeah, so you can see this contraption here. This is more like for a barbecue. It's sort of like this big grill thing. The barbecue is usually not set immediately on the ground or in the ground. So we would call this, yeah, this thing either maybe a campfire or a fire pit as well. So a campfire or a fire pit. But yeah, you would definitely, to roast uh, maybe sausages, or even more popular, we would say to roast hot dogs. It's really common to have hot dogs while you go camping, or at least here it is. Yeah, so roasting sausages and hot dogs and that sort of thing. Exactly. So, so now that we have some sort of like we have descriptive words for talking about these pictures. Uh, we always want to, like, we need words to be able to talk about what's going on in the pictures, but the activity actually isn't exactly just talk about what's going on in the picture. So we never want to just simply describe the picture. Um, what we want to do in this part of the activity is actually compare and contrast the two photos. So, us, for example, let's just focus on, let's compare this one. Let's compare number one and number three. Let's focus on that. So these are going to be our our photos. So we want to compare and contrast the two photos and answer the questions. And we'll go back to the questions in a bit. But it's always but for this task, it's really important to remember not just to describe them, but we are going to actually compare and contrast them. So there are some really key phrases that we could use for doing this. So really good obvious one is using the words while or whereas. So while and whereas. And we can use those to connect to contrasting ideas in a single sentence. So if we think about this one here and this one, we could say, for example, so in one photo we can see a man and a child who are picking fruit off some sort of vine, whereas in the other photo we can see a family around a campfire. Yeah, so we can also, exactly, we can also use on the other hand and however as well. Although these the use is a bit different. So we'll talk about those in a second, but yeah, exactly, you're right. So here we're just adding, you can see that we've added one sort of full sentence and another full sentence, and then we've connected the two together with whereas. And we could do another one with while as well. Does somebody want to write an example with while? I'll give someone like a minute to write something. And then we'll correct it. So while is also going to be used similarly, where we're going to take two sort of sentences and then connect them together with while. Maybe I'll think of one too if I... All right. Well, I have an example. I have an example if we can get to one. So we could also say, so here's mine. So in the bottom photo, we can see children spending time at a camp with their families or with their family. While in the other photo, we can see a man and a child who are gardening together. Yeah, so that's one example. And then, yeah, so we could also use on the other hand and however. The difference is, though, is that those words join together to, like, the two ideas remain in separate sentences. So, for example, yeah, so, yeah, phrases like on the other hand and however are used when there are two different sentences. So, maybe, so, and actually I think this would be better language even when we're responding to the actual question. But yeah, for example, yeah, so in one photo, it looks like they are really enjoying the sunny weather, or maybe they're enjoying um, some quiet time together in a garden. On the other hand, we need to think of sort of a maybe contrasting ideas. So on the other hand, um, camping is maybe a bit noisier, is a noisier activity because you would have a lot of fun with your friends, maybe. But you can see here how this is one very distinct phrase, right? And then on the other hand, is its own sentence as well. But yeah, exactly. So we can totally use those ones. Exactly. So let's talk then um, let's talk then maybe about one of these questions. So let's see here. Da, da, da. So what might children learn in situations like these? So here would be a good place to use, I would say, like, however, on the other hand. Because, for example, up here, a child would probably learn about, I don't know, the value of cultivating food, maybe of growing their own food, the value of nature. Um, on the other hand, here they might learn more about the value of spending time with their families. So I'll write those down maybe. And if you have a idea too, feel free to put it in the chat. So for example, so in the top photo, yeah. So in the photo with the garden, the children might learn the value of plants and, I don't know, nutritious food and how to, yeah, to grow food. On the other hand, in the photo with the camp, children might learn the value of spending quality time with their families. So maybe something like that. Yeah. Alright, so let's see here. So do we have an example? That's cool. Yeah. I'll just highlight that. So on the first photo, so always in the first photo, so in the first photo, that's a really common mistake though. So in the first photo, we're going to put a comma here, the man and the child are in the garden. So we'll just say a garden, in a garden or in the greenhouse. I mean, I guess, yeah, or in the greenhouse. I would naturally use a instead, like, since this is the first time we're talking about it. We typically use like a or an the first time we're talking about introducing a topic. So even here as well, in the first photo, a man and a child are in a garden or in a greenhouse. And then here, in contrast, this is also going to begin its own phrase here. In contrast, so in contrast, in the third one, young people and children, and here we need a verb, are spending time in, yeah, we would receive it in the wild, so we could say that, or just in nature. So, or in the wilderness as well too. So that might be something else we'd say. Exactly. But yeah, exactly. So in contrast, in the third one, yeah, young people and children are spending time in the wilds, and that's really great. Exactly. How might people feel in these places? How do you think people might feel about? This actually might be a good time to break out some of those comparative and superlative adjectives. So for example, um maybe yeah. So for example, maybe they're happier, or maybe this activity is more enjoyable and more interesting. So maybe people would feel happier, in one picture, or maybe the temperature would be colder in another place, or I think this activity is more or less interesting than the other activity. What do you guys think about these pictures? Yeah, in both yeah, I agree. In both pictures, yeah. So in both pictures, people are really happy. Yeah, so definitely, yeah. So we can also say in both pictures what's going on, right? So in both pictures, people are really happy. They're really relaxed. Yeah. Um, I would think that maybe. Hmm. I would think that maybe they're a bit more. I don't know if they're a bit more tired in the camping one, but because camping requires a lot of equipment and things, right? So, whereas gardening may not be um quite the same. I don't know. So I would maybe camping. So in both pictures, people are really happy, and yeah, so I have that, and they are really relaxed. In the camping photo, uh, the maybe the children might be, oh, maybe having more fun than, I don't know, in the garden photo. I mean, since they have they have lots of friends and family to talk with and joke with. It would be more challenging. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So camping would be more challenging than gardening. Yeah. I think too it would be a lot more harder because it requires more, equipment and planning than going out and picking, berries off a vine, right? So that's my hypothesis. I don't know. Exactly. What about do you think that maybe gardening might be more interesting? Just because gardening might be more interesting because you could then use those because you could use those skills in real life to grow food, maybe. Whereas camping, I mean, I guess you could use camping in real life situation as well, but I think people like growing food is becoming more and more popular. So that's at least that's my opinion. So, whereas camping uh, is just it's just more enjoyable and about having fun, maybe something like that. Exactly. Yeah. So I have a question for so I have a question for the group. So I have a question because I wasn't sure how long this would take, but I still have maybe like an hour's worth of things we can talk about. Did you want to stay for another hour, or should we end it? And then next time I will plan that better. So that's my question. Or maybe there's not an opinion, which is totally fine too. Yeah. Okay. So I have one in. That's all I need. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, let's see here. There we go. All right. Yeah. So we always want to compare, contrast, talk about the photos, um, and yeah, always comparing and contrasting and hypothesizing. But yeah, that was great. So part three then is a little bit different. Ah, wait. So we have one more about the last task. So let's check that out. All right. So the atmosphere of these two photos shows some kind of cooperation and relationship between each other and balmy, cozy, and cognitive emotions. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So the atmosphere of these two photos shows um so I would say like a kind of cooperation. So maybe a kind of cooperation, and so the atmosphere of these two photos maybe shows, maybe even just saying it, so it shows cooperation and um so and then we need like an article with relationship since it's just one um, between, yeah, so the atmosphere of these two photos shows cooperation and the relationship between um, maybe each other. Um, and then, so balmy, and cozy, those are going to be collocations with weather, so they don't really work with emotions. Cognitive, too, is a little, that has to do with mental, right? Your mental abilities, so you maybe like cognitive abilities, so your mental abilities. But maybe with the other end, maybe, and the warm and maybe friendly relationships they have with one another. Um, well, actually, yeah, the warm and friendly emotions. So, yeah, so the atmosphere of these two photos shows cooperation and the relationship between one another and the warm and friendly emotions they have. Just the warm emotions they have. I guess, yeah, warm and cozy, maybe, emotions they have. Maybe something like that. Or warm and fuzzy emotions. So how warm and fantastic they feel in these situations. Yeah. All right. So part three task is actually a conversation, since these exams are done in pairs. Um, and so what happens is actually you get like it's basically one of these. It's like a little spider web. It has a main question in the middle, and then there are some points around it. Um, but yeah, you basically get a piece of paper, and then the idea is that you and your partner has to talk about this question, considering the different points for 2 minutes, and then there's also a follow-up question that happens. And the idea is that you're not supposed to repeat what your partner says, really. Um, Also, sometimes people tend to sort of talk a lot during this part, but it's actually better to keep your contributions a bit short, so it's not a monologue. Um, you have to give your partner time to speak, and then it's also an opportunity to ask your partner to give their opinions about something. You agree, disagree with their opinions. Anyways, the idea is to have a really good conversation, and even though there are 5 different points, you do not have to discuss every single point during this. So, so yeah. So we're going to talk about these though. We're going to brainstorm some things that we can say about these points. So that's what we are going to do. So we are going to brainstorm some things we can say about these points. So the question obviously is, how do these things help conserve nature? And so we're talking about conserving nature, conserving anything. We're talking about saving it, right? Or to preserve it also. All right, and we have education. So education, renewable energy, national parks, animal rehabilitation centers, and zoos and aquariums. So, yeah. So, and then typically, like sort of in any conversational fashion, um, you could always like preface your point by saying, well, one thing we can say about this, or for starters, when it comes to education, it's really good for, I don't know, raising awareness about the importance of conserving nature. So we could say something like that, maybe. So for talking about the points, or to introduce your point, you could say, like, well, for starters, I think, maybe, or, one thing that does is, so for example, one thing that education does is educate or teach people about nature so they can, I don't know, respect it and appreciate it more. And that would naturally cause them to want to conserve it, right? Maybe. What else could we maybe say about education? So let me know if you have any ideas about how education helps conserve nature. Let's see. Well, one of the most important things it does is raise awareness of the importance of conserving nature, so people can understand the impact of their actions on the environment, maybe. So something like that, maybe. Feel free to add your ideas in the chat. Maybe another thing it can do is influence policy development, maybe. So regulations Or so environmental protections, there we go, can be put in place to protect natural habitats, maybe? There we go, environmental protections. Yeah. All right. So, oops. So, education gives huge possibilities for studying different resources. Yeah, exactly. So it gives us exactly. So education gives us it gives us huge possibilities for studying different kinds of renewable energy, kinds of resources, different kinds of resources of renewable energy, and creates vital and necessary investigations. So I think you mean it like leads people to want to do that kind of research, maybe. So education gives us huge possibilities for studying different kinds of resources. So maybe just different kinds of renewable energies, or actually it would be sources of renewable energy. So the resource has to do with the material usually. So the resource is going to be some sort of material we use to make something. So for example, we'll talk about natural resources, we would talk about wood, for example, but also, um, like metals and things, those are natural resources. So yeah, so metals that we might use to make something. Um, Even if we talk about like fossil fuels, right? Those are resources that we use. Yeah. So, but do you be able to find different types of renewable energy and create vital and necessary, maybe research in this in this maybe field. So education gives us huge possibilities for studying different kinds of sources of renewable energy and creates, because we're talking about education, so third person, and creates vital and necessary research in this field, maybe. Yeah. So we could say that, maybe. Exactly. Um, yeah, and then when I talk about sources, that's kind of like the different option. So the different kind of energy. Okay. And maybe it can shape. Um, so maybe another thing it does is maybe shape or give is teach. Is yeah, maybe shapes peop is shapes shape people's attitudes towards nature. So they feel a sense of responsibility um, that makes them want to protect the environment. So that's really helpful, right? Be something like that. Um, yeah, we might say you have you would feel a sense of responsibility, or you could shape people's attitudes or their opinions. Maybe also, and like you said, it's important. It's also really important for scientific research. What about maybe natural, national parks? National parks. What can we say about national parks, maybe? How do they maybe help us? Um, I mean, I know here one thing they do is provide maybe provide protected species with a wide, yeah, or one thing they do is provide protected species with is protect maybe endangered species because their habitats are protected from human, intervention, maybe, or from human activity, maybe. So it protects the habitats of animals. So that's one thing. I think it'd also be really good for scientific research. So that could be another thing. And of course, if you have an idea, just shout it out. Okay, so we have one of the animal rehabilitation centers. Yeah, exactly. So that is on the list. So let's go add that. So animal rehabilitation centers. Yeah, so animal rehabilitation centers inspired. So that's the past. That's probably a typo. Inspires, or actually, because this is plural, so centers, so just inspire all of us. And you would inspire someone to do something, all of us, to protect, protect, treat and change our attitudes and inner feelings towards, so to animals. So just in general, to animals. So rehabilitation centers inspire all of us to protect, maybe treat, it's like to cure, right? To maybe, but we can maybe say it a bit more general, to protect, and take care of, animals. So I'm going to put these two together like this, for us to protect and take care of animals, because those ideas are kind of the same. So you can both protect animals and take care of animals, and they're very similar. And then this, because this is talking about us, they change our attitudes and feelings and inner feelings. So we could say towards, and then I'll just say them to refer back to animals. So yeah, so animal rehabilitation centers inspire all of us to protect and take care of animals and change our attitudes and inner feelings towards them. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, also education is really good for volunteering. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, education also convinces maybe people to volunteer. Yeah, to volunteer and get involved in protecting nature, maybe something like that. Yeah, definitely. And a lot of them have like programs too, right? To protect people, or sorry, to protect animals. Exactly. Um, we also have maybe zoos and aquariums, which I know might be a little bit controversial. Some people think that they're helpful, other people don't think that they're as helpful. So that could even be a debate that you could do during this part of the conversation. So you could say, like, well, Well, one thing they do is contribute to uh, conservation research. You know, zoos and aquariums can conduct maybe much needed research on animals to better understand them. And then you could say, for example, well, I don't agree. I think they do more harm than good, for example. So that could be something. But feel free to add any other ideas. Um, I think too, like animal rehabilitation centers also, um, they often have breeding programs and things, right? So um, another thing these centers offer is breeding programs, which can increase the size of maybe threatened populations or threatened animals. So anything threatened, we're talking about something like an animal that's threatened. We mean like sort of on the verge of extinction, or um, that is just not doing very well population-wise. So either due to overhunting or habitat loss or everything else that goes on. Um, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't agree at all. I think they do more harm with good, and I do not agree. And I am against. And we would just say I am against keeping animals in zoos. Exactly. So, and I am against something. So we would say to be, yeah, exactly. To be against something. Yes. Yeah, it's like very kind of controversial. Um, they could also, though, well, they also do breeding programs sometimes as well. They also have a lot of like educational programs. Yeah, which can educate the public about the importance of conserving animals. So maybe something like that. So lots of great ideas. Did we cover all of them? Oh, let's talk about renewable energy. Also, really quickly, how does renewable energy conserve nature? Renewable energy. Do. I mean, obviously, it prevents, greenhouse gas emissions, which helps reduce, climate, well, maybe not necessarily reduce climate change yet, but will ease climate change. So one important thing renewable energy does is maybe reduce greenhouse gases or greenhouse gas emissions. There you go. Greenhouse gas emissions, since renewable energy sources. There we go. So sources, since renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, hydro, and hydro don't emit greenhouse gases. Um, they won't contribute to climate change. Hydro, there we go. So the governments of different countries have to think more deeper and responsible to zoos and Aquariums. Yeah, so maybe they need to think more critically. Yeah, so, yeah. So the government, so, yeah, so governments of different or various, yeah, of different countries um, have to think more and deeper about zoos and aquariums, maybe, and be more responsible, maybe. Yeah, so, because you would be responsible. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they're not always good. I think it depends. I think it depends on like the quality of the zoo and what they do. Yeah, sometimes they're really awful. Um, Another thing too is that so going back to renewable energy really quickly, is that a lot of so many, for example, many traditional power plants require large or huge amounts of water for cooling, right? Whereas this isn't the case with renewable energy. So, you know, water is conserved, which obviously is good for animals, all of us, because clean water is really important, right? Yeah, so lots of things that we could potentially say about these here. And then of course too, let's just brainstorm really quickly some ways to ask your partner's opinion. So what could we say to ask somebody an opinion? Oh, we have one more. Okay, just a second. So we have climate change creates quite unpredictable and unbelievable situations, and renewable energy becomes more vital than ever. Yeah. So unbelievable, that's how believable something is. I think maybe the word you want here, or maybe an even better, is maybe unbearable. If something is unbearable, it's intolerable. It's hard to live. Like it's pretty awful, right? So climate change creates. Um, we could also say is creating, because it's currently happening. So climate change is creating quite uh, an unpredictable and unbearable situation. So an article because we have one situation. So, climate change is creating quite an unpredictable and unbearable situation. And renewable energy, yeah, well, again, too, because it's very current, right, is becoming more vital than ever. But yeah, exactly. It's so important for us to figure these things out, right? So, exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah, and just a really, like a few quick ways we could maybe ask for opinions. We could say maybe like, what do you think about zoos, for example? What do you think about zoos and aquariums? Or maybe, um, how do you feel about about education and its role in conserving nature? You'll notice that I changed this form from conserve to conserving because it's following a preposition. So, so we can maybe say that. We can maybe also just ask people if they agree. So, for example, do you agree with me? Um, Also, a really quick question, because this is a sort of a common error I see. People might say, I am agree, but we never say that. Agree is its own verb, so we just say, I agree, I don't agree. Never say, I am agree. Yeah, so do you agree with me? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Or what do you think about national parks? Do you, I don't know, are there any near you that are doing great work to conserve nature? Maybe? Alright, so we're almost done here. So there's one more part to this exam. Believe it or not, the whole thing only takes about like uh, 12 to 15 minutes, depending on if you're with one other partner or two other partners. A dog's barking in the background. I'm really sorry if you can hear it. And the part four questions just basically continue the discussion. So whatever you talked about here, it's going to be that same topic for part four. Let's see here. Dun, dun. Yeah, so the final part of the exam is just a discussion about some open-ended questions, and they're going to be related to the topics in part three. So either you or your partner will be asked a question, and so the idea is that, say, if you get asked the question first, you would respond, give your opinion, and then your partner will be asked to say what they think as well. So if you don't ask your partner, the examiner will just ask. However, you can also just ask your own partner. In fact, it's a lot better that way. So that's what I recommend. So be proactive, ask them what they think, and then you would just basically have a discussion. And you would discuss until the time, you would discuss the question either until the time runs out or until you sort of run out of what to say, and then the examiner will just follow up with more questions as needed. But let's look at some maybe questions, sort of, or the style of questions that might come up. So there are always sort of these big picture items. So you notice that we started this whole exam talking about just very personal things, so things that are very specific to you and your experiences, and we've gradually gone through talking about other people to now just talking about big picture problems. So yeah, so for example, what are some problems that threaten nature and the environment? So let's maybe just brainstorm some of the problems. What kind of problems can you guys think of? Yeah, that could be one too. Like, would you ever take part in volunteering activities? Exactly. So we could say that. Maybe I'll put this here. Do do do. Or what kind of volunteer activities? So we could just make it a bit bigger, right? So what kind of volunteering activities could people do to do for do to protect the environment? Yeah, we could just do that maybe. Some problems that threaten nature and the environment. There's like urbanization, maybe. Um, or also just the building of roads, right? For example, because obviously every time a city gets bigger, or we even just make a new road, we're cutting down trees, we're destroying the environment for that. Um, Also global warming, obviously, which also contributes, obviously, to the rising sea levels, which is going to take out coastal areas, right? This also impacts weather patterns, so going back to that collocation, so changing weather patterns. Global warming also contributes to a phenomenon we call desertification, which is when areas that previously were not a desert become a desert. So, for example, they're saying that like the Sahara is starting to move north, for example, um, that sort of thing. Also, maybe deforestation. So when we, either we cut down the forest for whatever reason, whether it's for logging or just to create fields, um, land for agriculture, right? Yeah, so I guess farming, agriculture. I mean, those are sort of things that threaten the environment. Does anyone else have any ideas? Or have I covered them all? Possibly. Yeah, also trash, right? Garbage, exactly, garbage. Exactly. So garbage, trash is also extremely harmful to the environment. Exactly. Just pollution too, right? Like whether it's, air pollution or water, like we pollute waterways. Yeah, human activities which strongly pollute nature in the world. Exactly. So all human, exactly. Human activities which, yeah, strongly. Actually, we would actually, one word that collocates with pollute would be heavily pollute nature. Yeah, all human activities which heavily pollute nature in the world. Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Exactly. And then, so if we destroy nature, what can happen as a result? Maybe. So, for example, maybe loss of habitat, I guess. Loss of habitat. Or, here's a fancy word, loss of biodiversity. So, biodiversity has to do with, um, I mean, you can see this word, there's bio, that has to do with like animals or nature, um, biology. And then diversity has to do with sort of like the range. So in any given habitat or ecosystem, even, there's always like a wide variety of different plants and animals. Everything interacts with one another. And so uh, I think environments, or rather ecosystems, that have a lot of biodiversity tend to be more resilient, right? So if there's lots of biodiversity, then it gets harder for them to sort of adapt or cope with changes. So any loss of biodiversity, loss of the different animals and plants within a habitat is going to be hugely problematic. And that could maybe disrupt the food chain also as a result. So the food chain having to do with, um, one thing eats another thing, which eats another thing, and then we are kind of, at the top of that chain. So that would affect everyone, right? So also, ecosystems. Yeah, so ecosystems will change. So, and again, an ecosystem is just sort of like a region, and then all the plants and animals that live within that region, and they sort of react. They sort of need each other in order to thrive and live. Um, we might also say that animals, we say, go extinct. So if they go extinct, that means they die off. Like, for example, the dinosaurs went extinct a very long time ago. Or we could also say animals become endangered. So, which means that there's less of them, so it's harder for them to repopulate, and so that's really bad. And it may also change maybe migration patterns. So migration has to do with sort of the annual, or at least, yeah, usually it's seasonal sort of trips that animals will go. They will go from one area to another area, usually in search of food or for, breeding, that sort of thing, to nest. So migration has to do with that seasonal movement. Yeah, so it can result in changing of so change in migration patterns and also breeding habits maybe. And so breeding is just, they get together, they have more offspring. Um, yeah, exactly. So lots of those things. And any maybe some of the are there any possible solutions maybe for some of the problems that we just mentioned? So let's just really quickly maybe brainstorm a couple solutions. I guess obviously, conservation efforts. Maybe we've just done a full circle back to part three in education. Yeah, so maybe yeah, so one thing we can do is maybe one thing we can do is, yeah, right, invest in renewable energy and try to find a solution to climate change. Yeah. All right. Right. So the whole world, right? So the whole world. So we could say the whole world has, right, it's part of one, it's very connected, right? It's very interconnected. So the whole world has a special chain. And if we break um, the ecosystems, right, our ecosystems, this can build up, yeah, this can build up the levels of different diseases, exactly, yeah, definitely, which can have awful consequences, exactly, which could have awful consequences, exactly. So, yeah, because it's all really important, right, to keep everything in balance. Um, Absolutely. All right, so we're almost at the end. I just wanted to touch on really quickly just a couple other sort of ways that we use nature, because we don't necessarily have to use nature just to talk about the environment and about animals, but nature actually also has a couple other very useful definitions. So we might use nature to talk about someone's character. So, for example, we could say someone has a very kind or very generous, loving nature. So, for example, my friend um, Margaret is very loving in nature. She always is very mindful of me, mindful, and always remembers my birthday. I don't know. But we're basically saying that this person is this way, sort of, it's like a natural characteristic of them. So by their nature, yeah, so they are like that. So yeah, so sorry, I guess I changed this. My friend Margaret has a very loving nature. Yeah, very loving nature. So that's how they are, their character. Um, and then we can also use it to say that, how someone is naturally. So somebody could be a negative person by nature. So, or maybe he's very untrustworthy by nature. So we could say that, for example. Yeah, by my nature. Maybe I could say, by my nature, it's hard for me to trust others. So there you go. Instinctively, so by my nature, it's hard for me to trust other people, or it's hard for me maybe to open up by other nature to other people, and that's just how I am naturally. So if you say by someone's nature, you're talking about how they are or how they act naturally. Um, and we could also use it to say sort of the main characteristics of something. So, for example, an issue could be very complex in nature, for example. So, maybe, yeah, so the issue of climate change is very complex or complicated in nature. So, like overall, it's very complicated. Or something could be, for example, mathematic in nature, or even economic in nature, if it's about economics, for example. Um, yeah, we might use that as a way to sort of talk about the overall type or main characteristic about something. So that's another way that you might see the word nature come up. So, very common ways. And then just a couple of phrasal verbs that I thought might be handy for us. So, it's really common to say, let nature take its course, which just means to let things occur naturally. So, sometimes you need to stop fighting challenges and problems and just let nature take its course. So stop resisting, just let things unfold without worrying too much and just let it happen naturally. So let nature take its course. You also hear people refer to needing to go to the bathroom as like to answer the call of nature. So and it's just sort of very like polite way to say that you have to use the washroom. It's like, excuse me, I need to answer the call of nature. So he excused himself from the table, maybe, to answer the call of nature. So that just means to go to the washroom. Um, we could also talk about somebody's true nature. So that's when you basically reveal how you actually are, how you truly are. So, for example, people might hide how they are originally, right? But we could say over time she started to show her true nature. So, maybe at the beginning this person was very nice, they seemed very calm, but then I got to know them and I started to see how they really were. So yeah, so over time she started to show her true nature, maybe her real feelings, her real attitudes toward things. We also say that things are human nature, which just means that, a type of behavior is just very normal, very natural. We're just like acting that way because any person would. It's really normal. So we might say, for example, it's human nature to try and protect your family from harm, obviously. It's only human nature to want to, have a warm home and food and things like that. Or maybe it's only human nature to want friends and companionship, right? So those things are very natural to us. So those are some things that we could maybe say as well with nature. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone who came out. As usual, I will share these notes on the Discord. Um, I am also planning to do one of these streams next month. I might do a poll first to see what time to do it. But I'm planning on it, so stay tuned for that. And I might share this to YouTube. I may share this to YouTube. Although now that I think about it, I don't think I recorded it. So that's fine though. Next time. Thank you so much for joining me for this little experiment. It was really good to see you, and thank you so much for your interaction. I really appreciate it. I thought that I was going to do this by myself. So that's great. All right. Thank you so much, guys, and I will talk to you all super soon, okay? All right. So, thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming. All right. I will talk to you all super soon. Okay. If I can figure it. Hey, you're welcome. All right, thank you so much. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. It was really lovely to have both of you here today. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. Bye, guys.